at the Lawyers Committee. We will get started with our program in just a few minutes. But first, I wanted to give everybody a few minutes to log in. And as a reminder to those of you on Zoom, there is a question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. So please submit your questions throughout the program. Closed captioning is also available by clicking the icon button at the bottom of your screen. And finally, if you would like to receive updates about our work at the Lawyers Committee, please visit our website at lawyerscommittee.org. We will get started in just 1 to 2 minutes. All right, so thank you once again for joining us today. We will now get started with our program. My name is Ian Weiner, and I'm part of the communications team here at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And I'm joined today by Fred McBride, Redistricting and Voting Rights Policy Specialist with the National Lawyers Committee. So Fred, first, I think we should start off. Tell me, how long have you been involved with this work and where did you start?
Thank you, Ian, and it's a pleasure to be here. I have been involved in voting rights for, this is my 23rd year, so I am aging myself. I started with an organization called Fair Vote. It used to be the Center for Voting and Democracy, moved then to the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, several organizations since, and now I'm at the Lawyers Committee and glad to be here. So thank you for asking.
So before we get into the main discussion, I want to remind everybody watching today that you could find out more about the National Lawyers Committee's redistricting work at lawyerscommittee.org, lawyerscommittee.org, and visit our census and redistricting webpage. All right, so Fred, last week alone, you spoke on 4 panels related to redistricting, and you've definitely been making your way around the country, helping community groups and training the next generation of fair redistricting advocates. I know that one of these panels was hosted by the NAACP and 2 others were at colleges. So can you just give us a brief snapshot of what exactly happens at these panels, but more importantly, why are they so vital?
Great question, Ian. First, redistricting is not something that's just automatic. I don't recall learning about it in 9th grade civics, and not a lot of discussion about the districts that we vote from. A lot of discussion about voting, not necessarily the districts. What we're doing at the Lawyers Committee and a lot of organizations around the country, because many of us are virtual now, we are doing what we did 10 years ago, what we did 20 years ago, and before, but virtually. That is educating the public about redistricting. What is it? How does it relate to the census? Why is the census so important? Is there a method to drawing school boards, city council districts, your congressional district? If so, what is that method and how can we participate? Is this something that we sit back and watch elected officials do? Or is this something that we can advocate for on behalf of, play a role and participate in? That is the overall goal of these presentations. Let's talk to you about redistricting. Call it a redistricting 101, and then let's get you involved. That's what's taking place at these webinars.
Excellent. So today in Redistricting 101, I think it would be a really good place for us to start and basically talk about, for everybody listening in today, how legislators go from drawing districts to then implementing them. So essentially, what is the redistricting process like?
The process in general, first let's talk about who draws these districts. Most states utilize the legislative branch, their state legislatures for the Congressional, State House, and State Senates. However, there are about 12 or more states that have some form of an independent redistricting commission. This is an independent body responsible for adopting the plans. The idea is that you remove a lot of partisanship out of it and allow this committee with public input to draw plans. However, for states that don't have a redistricting commission but have the legislators drawing it, and on the local level, it's the local jurisdictions, the school boards, the city councils, the county commissions, those jurisdictions are drawing plans. But the idea is that the public gets to come to hearings, discuss their communities, discuss their districts, discuss the principles involved with redistricting, like the Voting Rights Act, like equal population, like the shape of a district. Discuss what happened the last redistricting cycle and how can we be fair to all groups in this cycle going forward. That's what we can do. And honestly, Ian, that's what we have to do. We have to play a role in this process.
So one thing that we know is that our democracy demands participation. And Fred, throughout the history of the United States, there have certainly been communities that have often been targeted by unfairly drawn districts. Why is that, and which communities are the ones who have been targeted the most?
Well, we would be here all day discussing institutional racism, systemic racism, and bias, implicit bias. So the why, we pretty much know the place people of color or how people of color have been treated in this country, particularly with voting. We know that at the writing at the Constitutional Convention, everyone, people of color, women, were not given the right to vote. This changes throughout American history and ultimately the Civil War, and then a big jump with the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And if you see behind me, there's a jar of jelly beans. I do my best to not eat these jelly beans, but I keep it as a reminder that once upon a time in America, people of color during registration and voting were asked, how many jelly beans exist in this jar? And of course, not one person of color could ever get that answer correct. And they were told, denied, vote denied, registration denied. So I keep that as a reminder of what I'm doing, why I am doing this. So we've got a history of racism and denial of basic voting rights in this country. There are a number of voter suppressive bills passed this year alone. The fight continues. And I am not glad to be fighting about this, but happy to be a part of the fight.
Absolutely. And so because there are unfairly drawn districts and various ways that legislators and independent commissions kind of manipulate their districts, I thought it would be best to kind of center our conversation from here on about the different ways that legislators, independent commissions, and groups really manipulate their districts so they get to choose their own voters. And that, of course, starts with gerrymandering. I know that gerrymandering is a word that is thrown around a lot, but people may not actually know what it means. So what exactly is gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering is the process of districts drawn to give particular people an advantage. That advantage could be a partisan advantage, or it could be some sort of racial or ethnicity advantage. But the idea, it can be done through packing a bunch of people of the same race and ethnicity in the same district such that they don't influence other districts. It could be cracking that district. Say that district has a significant block of minority voters, and we think that if that block votes together, they can elect a candidate of choice. So someone with nefarious intent would take this district, chop it up, and spread that minority population among other districts such that they have little influence in the electoral outcomes. That's gerrymandering.
And what groups are most affected by gerrymandering most often?
Most often, people of color, your racial identity, your ethnicity, and in places where there are pockets of minority voters, you can see minority groups packed together in one or two districts to keep from creating more majority minority districts. You can see these districts cracked such that the minority population is small, it's minuscule, designed for them not to be able to ultimately affect the outcome of an election. So primarily people of color, I would say, and then don't forget the partisan gerrymandering. Those in charge of redistricting are drawing districts to maximize their party's influence.
Absolutely. And so I think it would be best if we actually showed our audience and had a short discussion about what a gerrymandered district looks like. So this district right here is Ohio's 4th Congressional District. And this is referred to as the duck district because of its shape. As many of you can see here, it kind of resembles the shape of a duck. So 87% of people in this district identify as white, just 4% identify as Black, and 3% identify as Hispanic. There are 17.5 times as many white people as there are people of color. And as you can see here, this district purposely excludes Mansfield, Ohio, which is right around here, and Toledo, Ohio, which is right up here, which have large populations of voters of color. So this is the Duck District. It's just one example of a gerrymandered district. And Fred, I wanted to ask you, people sometimes use gerrymandered districts to produce a max Republican result or a max Democratic result. But overall, where is gerrymandering most dangerous?
I would say anywhere. Honestly, we automatically default to the South because that's where greater pockets and population of minority voters are. But let's not forget, this can happen on the East Coast. This can happen in the Midwest. This can happen anywhere. For one partisan advantage, we can design these districts, or they can design these districts to give that particular political party an advantage. But where there are people of color, you will question it. If you go back to that screen when you were showing the infamous Duck District, what a demographer would do is look at that district and say, wait a minute, Toledo, Mansfield, I would bet there are people of color. So I'm going to look at this shape. I'm going to look at this duck structure, and I'm going to look at the population outside of the district to see if I can make some inferences about why this district was drawn, and was it designed to include certain people and exclude others. And that's something you can do with your naked eye.
Absolutely. And so in addition to packing voters of color, in addition to gerrymandering, sometimes legislators in states will also pack districts and make them a majority-minority population. And so to look no further than this, we actually can go ahead and look at Texas's 33rd Congressional District, which is shown here. So this district is actually more oddly shaped than 98.6% of districts in the United States. Inside this district, 68% of residents identify as Hispanic, 15% identify as Black. So this is a fundamental majority-minority district in which well above 50% of the people identify as people of color. Now, one thing I also want to point out is this huge line right here. So this is Dallas over here, and this is Fort Worth. And this line is actually 32 miles long connecting them. So Fred, I want to just do a short discussion about, why do people pack voters of color? And, what does this line connecting these two really big metropolitan areas, Dallas and Fort Worth, what can that tell us about this district?
Well, for one, we don't always know the intent. We can make inferences and conclusions about intent, but we don't know. But one thing we can do is look at the data. So we can go into a district like this, look at that line in the middle, look at the population inside the district, as well as the population outside, to sort of make some conclusions as best we can about why this was done. And if it was for racial reasons, including racial pockets of voters or excluding racial pockets of voters, if there's a significant minority population, an overwhelmingly minority population, then someone like me asks, what would have happened if you took a smaller percentage of this group and placed them in a different district? Did you create this district such that that group of minority voters don't sway the outcome in that neighboring district? You've got to ask these questions, not just that district, about that district, but the districts around it as well. And that's something we do. This is what we do at our trainings. This is what we do, hopefully soon, being back out in the public at forums and with voters, talking about these districts. And you know what's interesting? No one knows your community better than you. That's why it's important to attend these hearings, talk about your communities, discuss your community, because nobody knows that place better than you do. And we call on you. Tell us about the district. Tell us about people excluded from this district. Tell us what you think. All of this goes into a redistricting discussion.
Absolutely. And so for our audience listening out there, so far we've gone through two of the methods that people use districts to manipulate their political advantage. So we've gone through gerrymandering, which is kind of when the district is really oddly shaped. And we've gone through packing, which is when they pick voters of color and compress them into certain districts. But there is also a third method out there, which people call cracking. And so to look no further than this, we actually can look straight at a college campus right in North Carolina. So just a few years ago, North Carolina A&T State University, there was a district line draw straight down the middle of the campus, just like this, separating it right in half to crack the district and dilute the voting power of these minority districts. So Fred, what can you tell us, about this district first off, but also about cracking in general? Where is cracking used? Why is it used?
Look at North Carolina A&T State University on your screen now. Look at that district line in the middle and look at District 13 on the left and District 6 on the right. Anyone can go, wait a minute, North Carolina A&T, it's the largest historically Black college and university in the country. We're talking about thousands of Black voters. And then step outside of the college campus and the neighborhoods comprised of Black and other voters. Why would a line be drawn through the middle? Obviously, because that group together in one district would have a tremendous effect on the election for that congressional seat, a tremendous effect. How would you weaken or dilute this tremendous effect? Take that line and cut it, just draw it straight in the middle. So imagine living in a dormitory in District 13, going to class with your friends who live in District 6, and you all are talking about voter registration and being really active in a very, very influential presidential or midterm election year, and you are on the same campus with somebody that lives across the campus in a different district. We don't have to do much analysis to determine what the rationale behind this was. This is why we have to attend the hearings, discuss these incidents, and let, whether it's a commission drawing it or whether it is a lawmaking body drawing these plans, let them know we're here, we are watching, we can draw something better than this. This is a community of interest. Why did you split it? We have to be upfront and active with these types of questions. And that's a great example, by the way.
And so for everybody listening, just to go through them again, the three ways that people seek to minimize collective voting power is by gerrymandering, packing, or cracking voters. So Fred, I want to ask you a question here. A lot of times people like to say politicians choose their voters, when in reality it needs to be the other way around. Voters need to choose their politicians. But what does it mean when we say that politicians choose their voters?
Another excellent question. imagine all of the years before all of this public advocacy around redistricting. These things took place in rooms with closed doors without our input. And I remember being much younger, many, many moons ago, we would find out what our districts looked like by reading the newspaper and seeing a map of it. No input, no attendance at these hearings, no advocating, because sometimes they were done without us even knowing. So when we say elected officials drawing or actually picking their own voters, that's individuals. And I'm not saying it's everywhere, but that's individuals sitting in a closed room picking their own districts. If you're picking your own district, you are picking your voters. We have to reverse that. We've got to flip that. Let's not allow elected officials to pick us. We pick them. So we told you to fill out your census form during a pandemic, and you did it. We asked you to get out and vote for a primary and a general election and a runoff election, and you did it during a pandemic. How about now, play a role in the district from which you are voting? Play a role in what that district looks like. Redistricting is for us. It is not for elected officials.
Absolutely. And now that we've talked about all the ways politicians can rig the system, essentially, and set it up so they always get the results they want, I think it might be a good idea to give our audience some resources for ways that they can get involved themselves and advocate for their own communities. So, as I said at the beginning of this webinar, our democracy demands participation. Nothing is stronger than the will of the people. So getting involved with redistricting, like we've been talking about, is extremely, extremely important. So first thing, if you visit the redistricting webpage of our website and look under the resources tab, that's lawyerscommittee.org, lawyerscommittee.org, under the census and redistricting page, you will see resources that are publicly available and able to be used by anyone. So Fred, do you want to walk us through 2 or 3 of these resources that are available to anybody right there on our website that they can use to get involved?
Sure, I love that. There's something called, first of all, our website, other national, regional, local organization websites, anyone that deals with voting rights is dealing with redistricting. So certainly, it doesn't have to be the Lawyers Committee. We hope you look at our site, but certainly LDF, ACLU, the Southern Coalition, local groups like national groups like the NAACP, local branches, People's Agenda, Galeo, we can go on. There are a number of groups out there. Look at those sites. Now, if you are interested, we were talking about gerrymandering and mapping. If you're interested in practicing drawing, then there are a couple of sites. One is Districtor, districtr.org, Districtor, the R at the end, .org, and Dave's Redistricting app, DRA 2020. These are open source, and there are a number of others, but these are open source mapping programs, free. Download the application on your computer and start mapping. We encourage you, however, to get with one of those groups I just organized. Talk to a demographer, talk to people who've been involved in voting rights and the redistricting aspect of voting rights, such that you can find out all the little nuances about drawing and things that you may not know, such that you're all on the right page, or we're all on the right page when we are drawing a plan and hopefully having that plan or discussing that plan at a hearing. So Districtor, Dave's Redistricting app, Representable, a number of sites out there. For those of us that do this daily already, there's a couple of sites, one in particular, the Redistricting Data Hub, which is my all-in-one shop for data, because we can talk about maps, but you've got to talk a little bit about census geography too, census blocks and people that are comprised in blocks, block groups, census tracts. And the Redistricting Data Hub is a great site to download a lot of additional data to help you discuss these districts and your communities.
And remember, all of those resources are available at lawyerscommittee.org, lawyerscommittee.org, and they are publicly available for anybody to be used. All right, so we know that we've been giving you all a lot to think about here today. So like I said, make sure that you visit lawyerscommittee.org, lawyerscommittee.org, to view the resources available to you and any other information about redistricting. Fred, I just wanted to wrap up before we head into the Q&A today to get your final thoughts about redistricting and the importance of getting involved, especially with this redistricting cycle.
Yes, and thank you, Ian. Democracy involves mandates public participation. So again, we told you to vote, we told you to fill out your census form. Now we're telling you to play a role in your district shape, everything from your school board to your congressional plan. And there are a number of resources, as we just discussed, that are available there. Participate, get active, write us, call us, go on our website. We'd love to work with you.
Okay. So now let's head into the Q&A. We got a couple questions in the chat. So one says, does Justice Kagan's dissent in the Rucho case from 2019 provide a workable, objective legal standard for identifying partisan gerrymanders so extreme that they violate the law?
I will say not only that dissent, but there have been a number of articles over the years about partisan gerrymandering, how justiciable it is, and what have you. And many have laid out a framework that we can all sort of deal with or understand and operate and advocate on its behalf. However, I will say one measure to effectively deal with to deal with the partisan gerrymandering issue would be passage of HR 1, which attempts to deal with this along with independent redistricting commissions and others to ease this process and allow for public participation. So I would urge you to go look at HR 1, track it, call your representative, something like that, talk about it, become part of that. If redistricting isn't the avenue you want to go on, you can certainly jump on the policy side and get behind some of these bills.
And here at the Lawyers Committee, we definitely support the passage of HR 1 and S1, the For the People Act. So we are definitely big supporters of that. Another question we have is, where can people go to identify sufficiently fair alternative maps if their map is not drawn fairly?
Well, again, I'm going to urge you to find a group that you may already be a member of, one of these civil rights or voting rights organizations. If not, call. And you don't have to be a member to attend a webinar just like this, to attend in public where there are public facing events. Participate. Get with a group, because these groups are oftentimes doing all of this public education and advocacy work, but they are also linked to legal organizations or are also a legal organization that can certainly address some actionable efforts in the event you feel that a plan has been drawn and adopted in your area and it violates the Constitution. Let's talk to some groups.
And then another question we have says, are there any cases that are currently working themselves through the court system that address whether favoring one party affiliation over another can be banned or is discriminatory? But moreover, how can we use the law to get fair districts?
I'm not exactly, there are a number of cases that we are watching, of course, to kind of see what that could mean for some other areas of voting rights. So I don't want to go into the specifics of those because they aren't all necessarily redistricting. But I will talk about a little bit about the law, and I'm not an attorney, and we do have attorneys available, and so do many other groups if you want a more specific legal conversations. But I want to be clear, I'm not an attorney. However, with reference to the law, the Voting Rights Act is a redistricting principle, as well as states have emphasized this in their additional state guidelines. And what does that mean? Districts should not be drawn that dilute or weaken minority voting strength as far as redistricting is concerned. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is how we would challenge these redistricting lawsuits, is still very much alive. Section 5 has been eliminated so to a degree because of 2013. Well, actually, it's been eliminated since the Supreme Court case, into the Holder case in 2013. However, we still have Section 2. Section 2 is still very much alive, and that gives us a roadmap in the event we need to challenge a plan. So again, get with an organization, call us. There are a number of organizations out there that are already doing this work.
And then turning back to HR 1/S1, the For the People Act, we know that there is a provision in the bill that outlaws partisan gerrymandering. But if the law is passed, how will that affect redistricting that is occurring right now? How will that affect the 2021 redistricting cycle?
I can't really answer that question now, because in the event that's passed, we don't know what the passage is going to look like. We don't know about the challenges coming out after that. So I don't really want to go down that line right now. What I want to do is advocate supporting HR 1 as it stands now. And we all know the lawmaking process, a ton of amendments, things like that. So I would rather weigh in later to see what happens with that.
All right, excellent. And then our last question today is, what makes a district a fair district?
One that, and that's a great question, by the way, and a great one to end on, a district that follows these redistricting principles. One person, one vote. That's about each district having almost the same number of people. That way your vote isn't more effective because you live in a district as opposed to someone living in a neighboring district. So think about equal population. Think about the shape of the district. How compact is it? Does it look strange with appendages? Make sure that all parts of that district are touching, unless water or something like that is a geographical barrier that's accepted. The Voting Rights Act. Ensure that districts were not drawn that weaken minority voting strength. And then look at things like communities of interest. You're not going to be able to keep every single community together, but you can certainly avoid slips and draws like we saw with North Carolina A&T. So when you look down these principles and you see that this commission or this lawmaking body made an attempt to follow these principles and were diligent about it, as well as had hearings and allowed you to participate, to comment, and submit plans. Submit these plans for consideration. In the end, sometimes you're not always going to get what you want, the exact district you want, but if you get something that can pass these principles, and someone like the lawyers, voting rights attorneys, and people in our organization, or demographers like me can look and go, this isn't a bad plan, then we're going to have to be okay with that. But we'll certainly do all the work to make sure that this plan is not in violation of the Constitution and other state guidelines.
Excellent. So just to remind everybody one last time, to view the redistricting resources, you can head to lawyerscommittee.org, lawyerscommittee.org, and under the Census and Redistricting webpage, there are resources that are publicly available and free that you can use and get involved with your own community groups. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And that does conclude our Redistricting 101 webinar. If you have any further questions, please email press@lawyerscommittee.org. Thank you.
Thank you.